The response to the last two parts was staggering, and I have heard you guys loud and clear. I am bringing back a part 3, and you guys have told me some of the cards that need saving. So just before we dive into the perhaps most requested card, Mantis, I just wanted to say that this video is being recorded just before the OTA on Thursday, although it will be released after the OTA as I'm out of town. So I just wanted to put a little disclaimer out there that if any of these cards do get changed and I haven't mentioned it, that is why in this video. Although the cards I'm covering, I don't necessarily see them changing, with a slight glimmer of hope for Mantis. So for Mantis, Mantis has always been a bit of an awkward one. She's a card that exists in that kind of card generating archetype, but was always restricted to having to be played exactly where your opponent played a card, and she didn't really have a deck that she fit in. So now I want to make it so that she's a 1/2, and change her on reveal to just be copy a card your opponent played this turn to your hand. By default, the card would usually need to be played next turn, which would mess up whatever plays you had to do, so giving the card like a minus cost or something did occur to me. I instead went for the on reveal to just be copy a card your opponent played this turn to your hand, and then have it so that if it was played here, give it +4 power. So now Mantis reads pretty much like Rocket, let's say, except she's giving the power to a card that your opponent has played. You're always going to get the card, but it will be given +4 power if it is played on the same location as Mantis. I think it's possible that she could be too strong, but at the 1/2 stat line that I'm giving her, it's knocked her back down slightly. I'm trying to think of many situations where it would be deemed too strong. I don't know, like if you had your opponent play Mother Ascani and then they played one of their cards down, Mantis gave it to you on that turn that they played it down, it would at least then have to be turn 5, which means turn 6 you have to play it, right? If it was played on the same location as Mantis, you're giving it +4 power. I could see arguments for reducing the amount of power you give it to be like +2 or +3, but I think +4 kind of fit with the Guardians archetype, and speaking of, they will be coming up shortly. I've done all of the Guardians, I will say, even though some of them, well, I guess one of them does actually technically see play. You'll just have to scratch that out of your mind for now, as I'm doing it more so to be able to cover all of them. But with this change, I could very easily see Mantis doing something. And this feeds into the change I have coming up for the Guardians cards, where I want them to have a bit of a change to their text, where people have mentioned it before. If you play it on the same location as the Guardian, it does something, but if not, you kind of get like a consolation prize. That's the kind of vibe I'm going for here with Mantis. If you play on the location your opponent plays on, you get the card and it gets +4 power, but the consolation prize is if you played on a different location, you still get one of their cards. And then it's just random as well, so you don't even necessarily predict which card they're playing at which location. I will say, however, if they play multiple cards, you only get the one that's played at her location, whereas if they play multiple cards and she's not at the location of any of them, you'll only get one card, basically, and that will be random as well, which I guess at that point is kind of even more a random effect. You guys will have to let me know what ideas you had for Mantis. I saw a bunch of them floating around. There was the +4 power one. Possibly, let's say, give it +3 power because you're always going to be getting the card. That might be more in line with cards these days. Either that or change it to a 1/1. I mean, the change is flexible. I'm also just wanted to be able to give a consolation prize. So next up is Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones has a 0% win rate, and I don't know the last time I faced off against somebody playing Jessica Jones. I think in an Arisham deck once. She's not awful, but she also needs something to be a bit more interesting. I know the problem with a lot of these cards is that they're given to players early on, and the card text might be overwhelming, but at the same time, introducing players to card texts that exist in other cards that they will actually be going up against and facing is also an important distinction to make. So for Jessica Jones, I'm leaving her at a 4/5, and I'm giving her the ability End of Turn. If you didn't play a card here this turn, +3 power. So basically every single turn this ability will go off. You play her turn 4, go off, and she'll be a 4/8, and then she'll be a 4/11. Now that is quite premium stats, but at the same time, Jessica Jones is old ability was restricted because you didn't have to play on her location once. With this new one, you'll have to not play on her location every turn if you're wanting that +3 power. Now, the reason I don't think that this is busted by any means is sort of similar to the Thing First Steps, where that card gets +2 power every turn. And the aim is to kind of fill up its location, right? So once the opponent's filled up its location, you know that that location will only be going up by +2, because the thing is only going up by +2. Similar effect to Jessica Jones. If you don't expect them to play a card there, you know that that location is only going up by 3 power, so you can kind of predict play, and it adds a little bit more mind games to it, because the opponent could then be like, you know, I'm actually going to play on Jessica Jones's location and add more power than just +3, whereas you're only expecting the +3 power. I don't know, I always like cards like that, where it adds a bit more mind game effect, because Snap's always been very good at that, and I think that a card like this would add a little bit more. There's not really many things in this game where you don't want to play somewhere, or if you decide to, you kind of get like a bit of a worse version of what you would if you had played there. I know that that was a really convoluted way of saying that this effect doesn't really exist, but I guess something like Warpath, it's not played really. I covered it in my first part, which would solve this issue slightly, but if you played Warpath and then played a card at another location, that's you deciding whether you want to keep the Warpath power or if you want to put power somewhere else. But those effects, as I say, aren't really in the higher levels of Snap, so people don't really see them very often. And I think that this card would then be brought in line with my proposed buff for Warpath as well. I would say if she was in a end of turn deck, she could be pretty good. I don't think she'd be crazy by any means. I mean, it's a 4/5 that's getting the same buff at the end of the turn that something like Fina or Havoc would, right? Those cards are getting the +3. I think Havoc's +3 now. I haven't played the card in a little while, but I think it's +3. Set Havoc back to +4. Probably needs it. But yeah, playing a 4-drop to only get that, and then if you trigger it again with Invisible Woman, it's +6. I mean, honestly, I don't think that's game breaking by any means. So, Adam Warlock is a card that got completely changed. This card, when the game started, was a 2-0. If you're winning here at the end of the turn, draw a card, basically. And then over the course of time, it went to a 5-4, and then a 5-5, and they were always too scared to kind of implement those card draw effects. I'm waffling on a lot about a card I'm not adjusting at all, so don't worry. Adam Warlock is a good example of what the Guardian should be, I think. Basically, if you're winning a location, you draw a card. If you don't, you get a consolation prize, and that is what I'm going to propose for each of the Guardians. So first up, we have Rocket. Now, Rocket actually sees some play. He's a pretty decent card in Bounce, and I don't think the card is bad by any means, but it only really has one home. The home where you kind of need to keep playing it, right? This is the weakest buff I'm giving to a card purely because I do think it's quite viable already, but because I'm giving all the other Guardians a consolation prize, I will give one to Rocket as well. So I'm keeping Rocket as a 1/1, but I'm adding to his text to be a on reveal if your opponent played here +4 power, otherwise give a random card in your hand +1 power. So consolation prize, right? It's not crazy, it's not really going to help out too much, but because he's a 1-drop, at least then he's doing something. As I say, it's a very minor buff, but it's purely because I wanted to put him in line with all the other Guardians that I'm adjusting. We do run slightly into the overwhelming amount of text for new players, but if all the Guardians sort of have this effect, I'm hoping it will kind of lead in to the new players understanding that that is an effect that the Guardians have. So this is Editing Supexa here, and what I realized was some of these card texts were quite long, and I think part of the issue for that is the text that reads, if your opponent played a card here this turn. Now what I proposed for that is shortening it basically, and I had a few thoughts, and I went with lock on, and I think lock on kind of makes sense. I still wanted to keep the on reveal part because that way you can re-trigger it with different on reveal abilities. But if the text afterwards was just shortened to lock on, I think it makes more sense. It doesn't necessarily mean it's like a new keyword or anything where it'll be like activate or whatever. It's more so just so the text itself doesn't take up an entire screen. It pretty much was filling up my entire graphical HUD. So it's like, okay, maybe it needs shortening. In which case, lock on would be something that new players would learn early, and hopefully that way just feeds into the understanding of the game. Sort of in the same way that cards recently have been given the movable tag, changed from this card can be moved, right? It's just to shorten the text and also make the readability better. So that's my proposed change. So if you see that appear on the HUD going forward and you don't hear me mention it, it's because I'm retroactively doing it. Next up we have Star-Lord. Now this is a Guardian that I kind of hated. We're not talking about the Master of the Sun version, just get rid of that guy. We're talking about the original Star-Lord. Now this guy was a 2/2 that basically just had an on reveal that did the same thing as Rocket, which always felt a little bit mediocre to me, you know? Giving him +4, making him a 2/6, I mean, yeah, that's premium stats, but at the same time, you could just play a Lizard. Especially nowadays, just play a Lizard and play Techno-Organic Virus. You're never playing Star-Lord. I don't know why you would ever decide to play this card over something like that, right? I guess there's some bounce synergy, but then you're always just playing Rocket. Star-Lord is sitting at a 0.03% play rate, which is very, very low. But I'm going to change his ability slightly to on reveal if your opponent played a card here this turn, +5 power, so giving him a buff of an extra one, and then otherwise give a card at another location +2. So I'm trying to make it in a way where all of these Guardians don't necessarily have to be played together, but if they were, they would synergize slightly, right? Rocket is the first card played. He could give power to something in your hand. Star-Lord is then played after. If the opponent isn't facing off against him and say, like, it's gone over to Rocket's place, he gives +2 to Rocket. It's kind of what I was aiming for, to have like a Guardians backing each other up effect with these until we get further down the line, but as I say, they'll be coming up shortly, and probably a little bit more of risky changes. But I'm curious to see what you guys think about those. But Star-Lord, I think it's a pretty safe change. It's not always guaranteed either, because if you don't have another card down, his consolation prize just won't work, and a 2-drop, I think it's middling for whether you'll have a 1-drop in Rocket or something else down at that point. I do then think he could possibly be more likely to go into a bounce deck, because if you've got a few cards down and then you play Star-Lord and it misses and it hits one of your cards, you're then bouncing back. That could also be a home for it. I don't necessarily know off the top of my head where this places the cards. There are a bunch of buff things this season especially. It could possibly go in something like that as well. But I have one card at the end of this, after I've covered all the Guardians as well, that I do think could probably help out this archetype. So next up we have Groot. Now Groot actually sits at a 0% play rate. I don't think there's actually any percent at all for this card. He is a 3/3 currently, and he gets +4. Same issue with Star-Lord. He's just basically 1 power more than Star-Lord, who is 1 power more than Groot. And again, I don't think that really gives any reason to play him. He gets his proc off and he becomes 1 less power than Debris, who, now let's face it, her downside is no longer a downside. So playing a card like Groot, where you could risk it just being a 3/3, I don't think people are ever going to really want to do that. So editing Supex are back here again. Turns out Groot is actually a 3/4, so if I continue speaking here as though he's a 3/3, it's because I genuinely believed it. However, in my buffed version, I'm going to make him a 3/3. Technically slight nerf in that aspect, but because I'm giving him a lock-on ability as well, it makes up for it. And I wanted to say in that aspect, some of these cards might seem pretty strong with their abilities, but it's because you're not 100% sure which one you're going to get unless you're 100% sure where the opponent's playing, sort of thing. Hopefully that's the last time I have to show up anyway. Back to the card changes. So now I'm changing its on reveal to on reveal if your opponent played a card here this turn, +5 power, to the same effect as Star-Lord, and then giving it the otherwise +2 power for your other cards here. Again, same effect. The cards are either buffing themselves if they're facing off against the opponent, or they're giving buffs out to other things, which could then lead into like Silver Surfer style things. And I guess right now is not a great time to talk about those kind of decks because they're running rampant. but I don't think they explicitly go directly into a deck like that, because you would probably prefer to always run something like Storm. But the Constellation Prize, again, here, I think is probably one of the better ones. And that's what I wanted to go with as these cards went up the Guardians ranks. I mean, we're on 3 drops now. 3 drops are quite a contested slot to actually get a decent amount of power out. So you're playing Groot. Imagine if you play Groot on a location that's full and your opponent doesn't play there. You're getting 3/9 worth of stats. Now that's premium, right? That's, I mean, what, Wilson Fisk level? He's 5, but I guess technically 3 when he gets discounted. And that, by default, is great, right? Because if you play there, not wanting the opponent to play there, like if you have a Maverick or something else, it's more mind games. And that's the sort of thing I love with these cards, right? Your opponent sees you've played, like, Star-Lord earlier, and sees you've played Maverick and possibly Stick or something like that. I mean, the playline wouldn't work, but you get my point. You then are going to want to play Groot on that and get the Groot buff on everything, but then your opponent could then play on the Groot location and Groot gets the buff instead. Which, I don't know. I think it's more interesting. It makes the cards more fun. It gives them more archetypes. And just making it so you don't have to worry about only getting a flat-out 3/3. That is the biggest problem with the Guardians, in my opinion, is you look at all the 3 drops, you're like, Jack Flag, yeah, that card can go up to like 3/9. Can it go above 3/9? I guess it technically can, right? It can go up to 3/11, which is insane. But nobody really plays that card. I guess to that extent, Groot then pairs with Jack Flag, and I think Jack Flag is a Guardian as well. I could be wrong about that. But then Groot buffs that. Jack Flag's buffs go off as well. It could buff Warlock, and that's Adam Warlock, that is. And I don't know. I do think that these buffs could intertwine in a way that could make it into an archetype, but I didn't directly want to kind of force it that way. Maybe it ends up being one of those things again where it's like, oh, Rocket and Star-Lord are pretty good, I'll throw them in my deck and the rest of them get forgotten about, but until we get to those cards, save your opinions, because next up we have Drax. So Drax also has the same fate as Groot, apparently has a 0% play rate across the board, and it's sitting at a 4/5. Again, same effect with the +4. Does it have +4? I just had to actually double check that it was +4. Turns out it is, which I do think is quite a weak stat line. But my proposed change for him is to nerf him to a 4/4. Now this is going to be a weird one, right? But it's also the one I'm probably most nervous about. And I'm changing his ability to, on reveal, if your opponent played a card here this turn, destroy their lowest power card here. Otherwise, +4 power. Now, Drax is the kind of guy who, in the Guardians and everything, he goes and faces off straight against the opponent, right? He has a bit of a bloodthirst about him. If he's faced against an opponent, he won't care about buffing himself, he'll just run straight in. That's the idea. If he doesn't have an opponent against him, he'll be buffed. He is Drax the Destroyer after all, and I felt that that was only fair to give him that kind of ability. Now, it sets him in a similar lane to Thing First Steps, where Thing First Steps is always destroying something with power lower than it, but you can kind of prepare for it. The trade-off with Drax is that you have to play on the same location. Now, if your opponent is expecting Drax, that's the other thing. They might just not play at the location where they have a bunch of small stuff they're worried about losing. Drax goes down, he just becomes a 4/8, which is worse than he was, yeah, but because he now has an even bigger ability, I don't know. I thought that that was probably balanced. You guys will have to let me know. Destroying their lowest power card there could be, I don't know, it comes to mind is like, what if it's Monster Island and then they've played a card there and then Drax just destroys the monster? But at that point they'd have to have played something above, or you reveal first, you know, that sort of thing. Which would mean that if you have priority it would be better. I do also wonder if these cards work with Supergiant. I actually don't know, but if they do, it's probably something worth considering. It does also put Drax in a similar lane to Negasonic Teenage Warhead in that case as well, which is actually making me kind of warm up to the idea a little bit more now, because Negasonic's pretty much guaranteed to kill whatever is next played there. Yeah, I don't know actually. I'm quite happy with this change now. I was a little bit worried going into it, but I've kind of convinced myself otherwise. And lastly, this one is, I mean, I said Drax was the scariest one. This one is also quite scary. So Gamora, she is the second most played out of the Guardians, which is no surprise because the other three kind of suck. Still a fairly low play rate, but she was a 5/8 with +5 if your opponent played there. I'm only acting really confused about that because I'm looking at my updated version and I'm like, is that what it was? But yeah, I'm changing her to a 5/5, which again, now you're probably expecting her to have some strong ability, right? Drax is a destroyer, Gamora is the kind of character that's more of a precise, deadly weapon, right? So I'm changing her ability to, on reveal, if your opponent played a card here this turn, +7 power, so she keeps the 5/12 stat line, right? Otherwise, destroy an enemy card with less power at the location that they were played. Wording might need a little bit of work there, but the concept is if she's played at a location that the opponent hasn't played a card on, and they played a card somewhere else, she will then destroy a card at the location that your opponent has played at that has less power than her. So she's a 5/5, right? They play a card somewhere, she'll destroy something with less than 5 power. This puts her perfectly in line with Thing First Steps, I feel. Which I know I've mentioned before, and I don't think Thing First Steps is an amazing benchmark of a great card or anything, because I think it's probably about mediocre. It's seeing more play now. But in terms of Gamora herself, I had an idea where it was like, what if you played her on an outside lane somewhere and she got the +7 power and she went up to a 5/12. Then you played Grandmaster and sent her to the middle, and they hadn't played on the middle, they played like left or right. She'll be putting 12 power in the middle and they'll also be destroying something with less than 12 power at one of the other locations. I don't know, I thought that was quite a cool little combo. Probably quite strong as well. But also, with all of these cards, it takes opponents playing around it and mind games into account as well. These abilities don't just flat out happen, and I think that's part of what holds the card back. You don't know which one you're getting. Like with Adam Warlock, you know you're going to be either drawing a card or getting +1 power. Those things don't shift too much, and if you're far behind or far ahead, you can kind of gauge what you're getting. With all of these, the thing that balances them is that you don't know 100%. Like, it's not guaranteed, right? Unless... So, Jean Grey. Jean Grey also sits at a 0% play rate. This card is one that, I don't know, the ability seems strong, but people just kind of... If you're playing like against a Bounce or a Zoo or anything, like even Merlin with the spells, this card never really gets its value worth. And it sits at a 3/4, which is already kind of below stats. So I'm changing her. I'm making her a 3/2. And I will bear in mind that if these other Guardians were changed, this card would be stronger based off of that. Yes, but the Guardians themselves, I don't really think I've changed their ability much. I think if they're still playing against an enemy other than Drax, they're basically getting the stats they had before. Which is premium stats, but the fact that you're now able to predict where they are a bit better. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm changing her text to ongoing. Players must play their first character here each turn, if possible, after your opponent plays a card here, +1 power. So, she's the 3/2 now, which is 2 power less than before, correct. And I'm changing it so that it's the first character instead of first card, which gets around the whole spell skill thing that I mentioned earlier. It's not a huge difference, but I guess it's sort of similar to how Professor X can have skills placed on the location, which I believe is the case. I might just be waffling, but I think that's the case. You can play skills on Professor X's location, but you just can't play characters. Same here, you can play your skills wherever you want, but you must play your first character at this location, which I guess is a bit of a buff and a nerf at the same time, because it prevents the whole Merlin thing where if you played like a polymorph at Jean Grey and then played another card somewhere else. I'm saying it like these interactions happened a lot, which they really didn't, clearly, because Jean Grey didn't really see play. I think people played her in Cerebro 4, possibly. I might just be on high alert. After the last video, someone called me out that Medusa was played in C5, which I hadn't even realized was a thing. I'm now making it so that when your opponent plays there, they get +1 power. It's not really the kind of thing your opponent can avoid either. They sort of have to play there and then give her +1 power. It then leans into maybe you play her and you play Madam Web. And then you move her with Madam Web, and then your opponent has to keep playing cards where she is and buff her even more. Which, if you play her on an empty location, she becomes a 3/6, which is pretty solid if your opponent plays all 4 cards there, which they kind of have to, really. So I think most games she will be a 3/6 with that kind of power. Unless you draw her late, obviously there's that downside. And maybe your opponent has cards in different locations, so there's no way to guarantee she's a 3/6. I think on average she'll probably still be a 3/4. But she has the effect, and now she also has the plus power, which I don't know. I think it adds a bit more utility to the card. It probably doesn't make her great. People might still not play her. I guess it's a bit of a tame one for me to give. But at the same time, I do actually think it would help her see play. For this video, I sort of went into it thinking that I'm not really going to be giving a specific archetype much focus. I'm more so just rebuilding the Guardians, but I suppose at the same time I did make Jean Grey into a card, and I changed Mantis in a way that you really want to play on the location that the opponent's playing on. So something like Jean Grey therefore would get more of a boost from having these other cards changed, which is why I haven't adjusted her too much. I should probably also add that Venus is a thing now, which is definitely a card worth considering because it's added to the game in a way that all these other possible changes that could add power to cards are now going to be crazy because Venus is the thing. So Jean Grey, if you have Venus down, gets +2 power now every time your opponent plays a card there, which, I mean, would just make her a 3/10, which I guess is nothing to scoff at, really, but you have to commit Venus and Jean Grey, at which point, why don't you just play something like Bishop, right? I guess that makes Jean Grey very much like Bishop, except you're relying on your opponent playing there. So I'm going to cut myself off before I continue waffling. I hope you guys enjoyed this part. Again, it took me a little bit longer this time because these cards are a little bit more awkward to try and figure out. I have also been quite busy recently. As I said as well, I'm going to be busy again this weekend, so hopefully none of these cards get adjusted, but also kind of hopefully because they need it. But if they do, that's the reason why I'm releasing this video. But yeah, you guys have shown tremendous support, honestly. It's been huge to me. I'm going to have a little segment in here, so if you don't want to stick around for the whole the soppy nonsense, feel free to head out. And thank you very much for sticking around. But yeah, I've hit the milestone recently where I can get memberships on the channel, which is insane. I've just been doing this for a hobby, really, so hitting the memberships has been a real wake-up call. I was like, wow, I genuinely hadn't even realized. So I was setting those up this week as well. I've added some emotes and some little badges to get by your name and stuff. Obviously no pressure for anybody who's interested in that, but it was something that was kind of a little bit fun to set up as well. I really enjoyed that. And then just around the corner is monetization. Now that's something that back when I started YouTube I actually had initially because of the way YouTube used to work, but now they made it so you have to get 4,000 watch hours, which almost reached it within the last year. This is as well, but I've almost reached it now, so and it all comes down to you guys. I just wanted to put a little thank you in there at the end. You guys have been amazing. The little community I've built, like just seeing the same people pop up in the comments every so often, and hearing everyone's feedback, it's been truly amazing, honestly. You guys are great, and I thought I'd leave you with that before I headed off today. I will be out and away from my PC over the weekend, so I won't be able to see all the comments straight away easily, but I hope you guys do really enjoy this video, and let me know if you want another one. It's getting to the point now where it's getting a little bit tricky to find cards. I could go back through and possibly look at some like Series 4 or Series 5 cards that could see some more play. Somebody commented about Dragon of the Moon, which is an interesting one as well. I could always have a look at that. But I just wanted to say thank you again. I've probably said thank you like 5 times there. Ah, my outro even has a thank you in it. I was about to start it until I realized. I was like, I'll just keep the same one that I used to do, where it's like, if you guys enjoyed the video, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe, which sharing isn't even a thing anymore. Thanks in advance, and I'll speak to you all next time.